Well, hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us again for another virtual program from the Kent District Library. I'm Diane from the Programming Department, and I'm so excited to share with you this series of videos that are created by the Library of Michigan for the 2021 Michigan Notable Book Award winners. Author Conversations introduce us to the incredible writing talent in our state and prompt those questions that you might ask if you were to meet those authors in person. We learn about how they got started, what inspires them, and those unique details about their award-winning book that hopefully will inspire you to read too. Today's conversation is with David Meach about his book, Wolf Island: Discovering the Secrets of a Mythic Animal. It's a fascinating topic, and I hope that you'll enjoy this author conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Gleisner, Head of Collections at the Library of Michigan, talking with author David Meach, author of Wolf Island. He is here today, one of our Michigan Notable Book winners for 2021. David, how are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you, Tim. How are you?
I'm good. And where are you calling from today?
I'm here at my home in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Well, very nice. Well, good to see you, and thank you for calling from the other time zone. It's good seeing you, and thank you for your wonderful book. And David, for our viewers, I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how did you come to become a writer?
Well, okay. So first of all, I actually am employed by the U.S. Geological Survey.
Okay.
And basically, I've worked for the federal government and the Department of Interior since 1969.
Okay.
So I've been here a long time.
Right.
And I'm a wildlife research biologist. That is what I do for a living. And my title is Senior Research Scientist. I also have an adjunct position with the University of Minnesota. And I've been with the university since 1973. And that's where my office is headquartered.
Okay.
And I don't teach there, although I do give lectures in various classes as invited. But I do have and have had since 1973 graduate students at the university. I have 2 master's students at present. So I do incorporate those students into my own research, which is what I do for the U.S. Geological Survey. And basically, that research is on wolves and their prey. That's the way it's been for my entire career.
Okay. And Minnesota's a perfect place for that. I mean, you know, up north and everything else. So wolves have always been your reason. So how did you start writing?
Well, I got interested in writing actually as a teenager. And it really, I suppose it had to do with my interest in the outdoors and in expressing myself, because as I look back, I can recall writing letters to editors of newspapers in my teen years. And so that seemed to blossom more when I went into college at Cornell University for a wildlife career. I ended up including in my courses a magazine writing course. And even before finishing at Cornell, I had started to publish articles in magazines. And that gave me quite a bit of personal satisfaction. And it allowed me to write about the subjects that I was actually studying in my courses and of course later on in my career. If I had been working with something like mice, maybe that would not have been as fruitful as it has been working with wolves. But as everyone knows, wolves are quite controversial, and so there was always an opportunity to write about wolves. I didn't, I didn't write exclusively about wolves. I've published about, well, somewhere over 100 magazine articles for the popular press, including 2 or 3 for National Geographic.
Wow.
And those were on wolves, but others have been on other wildlife species, and even 1 or 2 on. I remember that there was a faculty member at the university here who one time was big on trying to start an experimental city, and I wrote on that for a while.
Really?
But generally conservation-oriented writing primarily.
Fantastic. So I got to ask, I mean, your whole career, so from 1969 onwards, and you've been at the university since 73, you said? that
Well, 73, since 73, I've been at the university, but I've been writing. I think my first published article was probably in 1958 or something like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so your career, though, I mean, has it always been on wolves? Has your whole career been?
Yes, really. Well, there were a few years around 1963 through 68, 67, let's say. I worked with a new technique at that time for working with wildlife. That was radio tracking. I mean,
Oh.
everyone knows that you put collars on animals
Right,
now and
right.
can follow them around, but that wasn't always the case. And in the early parts of my career, you couldn't do that. If you wanted to learn about animal movements, which I did, for example, in my during my summers at Cornell, we could catch an animal, put a tag in its ear, and then if we caught it again someplace else, we knew how far it moved. Or if
Sure.
somebody hit it with a car or shot it or something, we'd have another location for it. And that's all you could do to learn about how far it moved. But eventually, the process of putting a radio collar, a tiny radio collar on an animal was developed. And I happened to be on the ground floor of that. I did not develop that technique, but I worked with the person who did.
Wow.
From about 1963 to 1967.
Okay.
That person was Bill Cochran from Illinois, and he published the first article in 1963 on radio tracking. He experimented with putting radio collars on cottontail rabbits, but since then, he moved to Minnesota, and I worked with him here for those years, putting collars on raccoons and deer and that kind of thing, and then went off on my own in 1968, put collars on wolves, and we've been doing that ever since. So those years I was working with other species, and in fact, I did along the way. I was invited out to Kenya, for example, to put radio collars on leopards over there.
Wow.
Introduce that technique. Since I was using it successfully in the U.S., folks in Africa wanted, some help with it. So I brought collars over there, and we put them on leopards, and then also at the same time visited Tanzania and helped put the collars on lions. And then later it would have been in the 70s and early 80s, I went twice to India and helped put collars on such animals there as tigers, and there's actually some lions in India, and put collars on them, and an elephant and several other species to teach other biologists in India that technique. So, I have had some experience other than just with wolves, but my main career has been with wolves.
What drew you to wolves? What was it about the wolves that fascinated you to make a whole career of it?
Well, the fact, I've always been interested in carnivores, animals that I had to kill for a living
Sure.
and search out and hunt and all. And even as a teenager, I learned fur trapping, and I trapped, learned how to trap things like muskrats and beavers and that kind of thing. But I was always more interested in learning about how to catch mink, which are carnivores, and foxes. And so having that as a background, I was interested for graduate school in doing some kind of graduate work with a large carnivore. At that time, as an undergraduate, I thought, well, first of all, as an undergraduate, I spent 3 summers working with bears, black bears, and those are the animals we were putting ear tags on. There weren't any radio collars at that time.
Sure.
And my website, incidentally, has a bit information about that, how we would catch the bears and subdue them and put these ear tags in them. But since I had that experience, when a professor at Purdue University was looking for someone, a graduate student, to work on wolves, he heard about my experience with black bears and experience in the wilderness working with them. And actually, he ended up asking me to do the project. And that's how I got involved with wolves. I hadn't even known about his project. This was Durward Allen, who is the author of Our Wildlife Legacy and some other books. And he had gotten an NSF grant to study wolves on Isle Royale in Lake Superior.
Okay.
And he was looking for someone to do the project, and sought me out at a wildlife conference, as I was an undergraduate who was attending that conference. And it was interesting because he asked to meet with me, and I couldn't understand why a professor like him would want to meet with me. And we sat down in a small room, and he started telling me about Isle Royale, which I'd never heard of.
I was going to ask, I mean, had you even heard of Isle Royale at that point?
No, I was raised in central New York State, Syracuse, and Cornell, of course, is just south of there on Ithaca.
Right,
and
right.
I hadn't done much traveling, and he began describing this island out in Lake Superior. It wasn't just, you think of an island, or when I thought of an island, I thought of a kind of a little piece of land out in a lake somewhere. This was 45 miles long.
Wow.
And 9 miles wide and 210 square miles. I thought, wow, this is quite an island. And I realized it's sort of a world of its own out there. And he said, well, not only that, but it's full of moose. And he said, some years ago, wolves crossed the ice from Minnesota and got over into Isle Royale. And so now there's wolves out there living on those moose. And he said, I've got this money to do some research on that subject. And I said, well, I wish you luck. And he said, I want you to do it. And
wow.
I said, yes.
Right, yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's how I got interested in wolves, really.
And I mean, you've been writing all along in your career and everything else. I mean, I got to ask, with that lifetime of experience of wolves and everything else, I mean, how do you know which experiences you're going to write about, or which ones you think you're going to turn into books, if that makes sense as a question?
Yeah, it does. As a researcher, which is what my job has been all this time.
Sure.
Yeah, we have to publish articles about what we're learning, and so you just come to understand that there are certain things that are unknown, that are of a certain amount of consequence. So, for example, when I did the work on Isle Royale, which took about 3 years, and that was for my PhD dissertation, I knew we needed to know, first of all, some pretty basic facts. How many wolves were out on that island? How many moose? I mean, those are kind of logical facts, you know. And then since I had spent most of my time in a small aircraft during winter as a passenger, I had my own bush pilot, and we would follow those wolves around. There was a big pack of 15, so they were fairly easy to track in the snow, and follow them around day after day and watch them interact with the moose. And, you know, at that time, the general public kind of thought that wolves, well, they live in these big packs, so they should be able to kill just about anything they want. I mean, take 15 wolves, sure, they should be able to kill an animal pretty easily.
Right.
But that's not what I was finding. I was finding that they had a great deal of a hard time killing these moose. In fact, most of the time they didn't kill them. They would find one and try to chase it, or if it stood its ground, they'd encircle it and you know, threaten it. But that animal was able to stand them off in many cases. And so as I followed these wolves around for 3 different winters, I actually ended up watching them interact with about 130 moose. And of those, they actually only ended up killing about 7%.
Wow.
And that was quite a surprise. So obviously, that was something that I, as a writer, felt was important to get across. That that what we all, meaning not just me, but sort of science in general, had just thought that these animals could kill anything they want. No, they couldn't. And so that became the subject of one of our first articles for National Geographic. And it was the main subject of my dissertation, which ended up being a book, The Wolves of Isle Royale. So that was my first book. So, you know, it was kind of having a logical thought about what should one emphasize in writing something like this. And then as I went on through my career, various pieces of information that I just thought as a scientist was of interest to science, you know, would become the subject of different pieces of literature, whether they be, sometimes they were 1-page notes in a scientific journal. Other times, you know, I felt the public needed to know something, and I'd write a popular article on a particular subject. But that's the way it's been through the entire process.
How do you know, though, if I may ask, David, how do you know when it should migrate from an article to a book? What pushes it into book level for you? What is it?
Well, when it depends on how discrete a subject is, and how interrelated something is. So I think maybe a really good example of this is that I was asked to do a study of wolves in Denali National Park in Alaska. And that was going to be a shorter study, 2 or 3 years, ended up being about 8 or 9 years. But as the study was winding down, and we had a whole bunch of data on a number of different aspects of the interactions of these wolves, there they were preying not just on moose, but also on Dall sheep and on caribou. As the study was winding down, and you know, I was obligated to write up what we had learned, I realized that with these 3 species they were preying on, the moose and caribou and the Dall sheep, and the kind of information we had, that yes, there could be a couple of approaches. We could divvy this kind of information up, but that given that we had so much material, that it would really make a very good book just to integrate all of this information.
Sure.
So, I mean, because it was all related, whether it was about the wolves and what animals they were preying on, or where they lived in relation to those animals, or where they lived in relation to each other. Like each wolf pack has its own territory, and we had a lot of data on that. We had, incidentally, this study also involved radio collaring a lot of wolves and a lot of caribou. So we had this movement information as well. And I just thought that, this all interrelates, all this information interrelates. This should make a book. And so we decided to do a book on that subject. So that's kind of the way that it ends up working. It sort of comes to you as an entity. It's like this piece of information is an entity because it's just a small little incident that might have happened. So that entity is just a note for a journal. But when you have all of this related material, sometimes it looks like this would make a good book. And so that's kind of how it comes together.
So I gotta ask, I mean, for your writing process, I mean, is it a daily thing for you? Is it just based on projects? Is it, ideas that germinate over the years?
Boy, it's all of the above. I mean, when I'm out in the field, of course, I'm not writing.
Right.
But now, I'm toward the tail end of my career, and rather than spending a lot of time in the field, I still have a lot of data to write up, and so I'm spending most of my time now, or very little, in the field, and more of it writing almost every day. I don't know if you got the information from from Wolf Island, that I've spent several summers, actually 25 summers on Ellesmere Island up in northern Canada. And so I'm working on a wrap-up book on that now.
Wow.
I haven't been there since 2010, although some of my colleagues since then have been there. And so, but they're done too. And so now I'm doing a big wrap-up on that project.
Okay. So let me ask, with all your books, nature writing is it's a niche type of literature. Is it difficult to find a publisher? Do you rely on certain presses, or?
I have to say, I have to admit that success begets success. You've heard that, and we all know that. And so it's been very easy for me. And I attribute a lot of that just to the fact that I'm writing about wolves, and they're popular.
Right.
And since I've had some experience and some success writing, it has not been I've not had any trouble finding publishers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess what was the process for Wolf Island? How did that germinate?
Well, that was the only book that I did by collaborating with a professional writer.
Oh.
All the others I've written myself, sometimes with colleagues, many times with colleagues, co-authored books and stuff. But this one, it evolved simply because, as you'd know from reading the book, Isle Royale came into the news very much about a few years ago when the wolf population there was going to extinction.
Right.
And the Park Service decided they wanted to reintroduce wolves there. And so the Isle Royale came into the news, and I had in the back of my mind been thinking about doing a book that was sort of a personal look at my early years on the island. And this seemed to be an excellent time to do it. And since my first years really began the entire project that went on for 60 some years. And I thought, well, this would be a good time. However, I was working on this Ellesmere book and another book, which is more of a sort of autobiographical thing. And I'd had 100 and some pages of that written, and was also writing this Ellesmere book, and I couldn't afford to then suddenly jump off and do a third one. And I thought, but I've got all my journals and all my field notes from that study, from the Isle Royale study.
Right.
I was friends with a professional writer, Greg Brining, who had actually accompanied me one summer up into Ellesmere Island. And I wondered if he'd be interested if I just turned everything over, all my journals and field notes over to him from the Isle Royale study, whether he'd be interested in perhaps helping me with that one. And it turned out he was. And so the deal was that, okay, Greg, here's everything, go to it. And I'm willing to help wherever you think I can. And I need to go over the whole thing with you. And so we made a deal on that. And so he did the writing on that as he developed each chapter. Well, he also interviewed me several times and he used my field notes. And as he developed a chapter, then he turned it over to me and I would check it all over and add some material, edit it to the extent I wanted. And it didn't need a lot of editing. He's an excellent writer. But I had my own touches I added to it here and there, each chapter. And then when he was finished with all of them, then again, I had a chance to go over the entire manuscript and edited and all that. And we did it together that way. But he did the actual writing, and it's excellent writing, I felt.
Yeah, no kidding. So for our viewers, many of whom I'm sure have not been there, could you describe Isle Royale? I mean, I've been up to Copper Harbor and the Keweenaw, but I've never been to Isle Royale. So what's it like and why is it special?
Well, okay, you know, it's forested throughout. So as I said, it's 210 square miles of basic wilderness forest.
Right.
And both deciduous on the basic, the southwest end, and coniferous on the northeast end, but with a lot of blending of the two, you know, in the middle and in various parts. And it does have trails on it, hiking trails, which were handy for me as a researcher there in the summer, traveling around. And it has little, I wouldn't call them, well, let's call them old former settlements from before the island was a national park. So
Sure.
there are places where there's docks where one can dock a boat. So one can travel around the island in a boat and then leave it in certain places where it would be safe and safe from storms and all that from Lake Superior. And so I could stop at one point and hike around the island and come back to the boat and then get back to my headquarters, which was which was an old fisherman's home.
Okay.
Used to be commercial fishermen there. In fact, there were a few left there while I was there, and others that had left before that. So I got to live in one of their places. And there were times where Park Service trail crews or other Park Service boats would be going to a place and I could make arrangements for them to drop me off. And then I would hike to a certain place and then get picked up at a prearranged time or something.
Right.
Have my boat stashed somewhere and then could come to that boat. So that was a good way of getting around. But otherwise, you know, it's either by boat or on foot.
Yeah.
And there are facilities for tourists on the northeast end and the southwest end. Otherwise, there are lean-tos where hikers can find shelter, or you can, you know, use a tent and camp in various places on it. But basically, it's a large, wild, forested wilderness.
Mm. And the wolves, I mean, what year did they cross over originally?
Well, it is best we know they crossed over about the winter of 1949, where the lake froze over from
Right.
the closest that Isle Royale sits to the mainland is 15 miles in its closest point and about 20 at other points. But so the lake had to freeze from the mainland on Minnesota and Ontario the mainland over to Isle Royale for at least 15 miles. And that ice had to stay frozen for weeks before wolves could actually find, so imagine if you're a wolf wandering around in Minnesota or Ontario, and you find this ice and you look out, and incidentally, they'd be able to see the island from the mainland. And yeah, over there.
Wolves?
Yeah. And
Really?
yeah, if they were on any kind of a high point at all, near
Okay.
they would be able to see the island. Yes. Well,
Wow.
I don't know a lot about this stuff, but I think the horizon, I think, is visible for a human at 12 miles or something.
Yes, that's what I've heard. Yes.
Yeah, and then a wolf, of course, would be lower to the ground. But if it was up on any kind of a hill, would be able to see across that 15 miles to the island. And there are hills along the shore of Minnesota and Ontario, and so wolves would be able to see over there. But if it turned out that it was frozen partway over, or it wasn't frozen, it was partway over, the wolves couldn't get there. So it would have to be frozen for a long period before, by chance, a wolf would see the island and see that there was ice, and then start out there, and then eventually be able to make it. It's not a long walk for a wolf. A wolf could get across there at its regular pace in 3 hours.
Wow.
They tend to travel at their normal pace, not a hurried pace, just their normal pace at about 5 miles an hour. Their hurried pace would be 8 or 10 miles an hour. And I don't mean running, just kind of a hurried pace. So they could get over there fairly quickly. And that's what happened in 1949.
And the moose, were the moose already there? I mean,
The moose had been there since the early 1900s.
Okay. And were they brought over? Were they?
No, so far as we know, they probably swam.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the best information we have, is they probably swam. They're long distance swimmers, and that's not a problem.
Okay. All right. And this book, for readers, what are you trying to convey to readers with your book, Wolf
I'm
Island?
sorry, say again.
For our readers, for the viewers, what are you trying to convey with this book? What do you want to tell them as the author?
Well, the thing I would like them to know the most is that the wolf as a animal has a pretty hard time making a living. Rather than just it can do whatever it wants, it's got to struggle. And
Right.
In its struggles, it has to travel day after day after day, and it's not unusual for wolves to put on 15, 20, 25 miles in a day.
Wow.
They're doing that to try to find an animal that is not so dangerous that the wolf will get killed in trying to catch it. And
Right.
it means that it's has to look over a large number of animals day after day after day until it finds one that is perhaps really old. And that's what happened in my studies. The wolves ended up taking the older moose, the ones that were debilitated from, say, winter ticks, or sometimes they have their lungs are loaded with parasites that sort of hinder the moose from breathing and stuff, and debilitate it. And those are the ones that the wolves have to find in all their travels, and then try to kill those. And it's still a struggle. But eventually, day after day, they will find one that's they're capable of killing without too much risk to themselves. However, it does turn out that wolves do get killed by their prey. Even small prey like deer have killed wolves. So that those prey animals are dangerous, and the wolves have to really struggle hard to make a living. And that's what I would like to try to get across in this book.
So let me ask you, with your career in Isle Royale being the way it is, it's an isolated island, middle of the largest lake, maybe not the middle, but on the edge, Great Lake. Have you been able to find discoveries or yeah, I'm just gonna say discoveries that you wouldn't necessarily be able to find anywhere else. You know, I mean, in such a closed
Yeah,
society.
yes and no. Some of what we learned, we could learn elsewhere, but some of it we couldn't because Isle Royal is special and I haven't mentioned this earlier, and I should have. It turns out that the only major prey animal on the island is the moose, and that's different from, say, Minnesota, where wolves have white-tailed deer as well
Right.
as moose. And in Denali Park, you remember I mentioned they had caribou, moose, and Dall sheep. On Isle Royal, the only major prey that's available on a year-round basis is the moose. And you know, they can take beavers in the summer, but the beavers are locked below the ice in winter. And so the only major prey animal there is the moose, and the only major predator is the wolf.
Wow.
So when you go to the mainland, for example, let's just take Minnesota. Not only do they have two prey animals, the deer and the moose, but those prey animals have not only the wolf as a predator, but the black bear that can for young ones, and coyotes and lynxes, bobcats, so that the Isle Royal wolf prey system is a simple system. It's the simplest wolf prey system that we know of, and that's
Wow.
where it's unique.
Yeah, that is unique. I mean, I always just assumed there would be other animals on that island.
Well, there are some other ones, but they're not, in terms of the wolf prey system, they really don't amount to much. Sure, there's foxes there and there's snowshoe hares, but and the foxes live on the hares and all that stuff. But as far as wolves are concerned, you know, although wolves will take snowshoe hares and foxes for that matter, you know, they don't amount to anything when it comes to the wolf's major prey. It's prey there is moose. That's all there is.
And I'm totally getting off subject, but I'm very fascinated because I've been fascinated with Isle Royal since I was a kid. I got to ask, if the wolf wasn't there, would the moose eat themselves out of existence? Would they starve?
They actually did, not out of existence, but they did starve in mass there before the wolves. The moose population, remember, they were there since the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And their population did build up and starve, massive starvation there in the 30s, before the wolves ever got there. That hasn't happened since, of course, because with the wolves, if an animal's getting close to starving, that wolf's going to find it and take it before it actually dies, usually.
Sure. And then, David, I guess when the government decided to bring wolves back onto the island, as a scientist, or not back, but reintroduce more numbers into the population. And I do remember those news stories and always following it with a bit of curiosity about the fact that they would literally track how many numbers of wolves and moose were on the island every given year. Did you agree with that? Did you think it was the right thing to do?
Well, actually, I had mixed feelings at first. Certainly, I did not condone reintroducing wolves while there was a chance that the original population could repopulate, and because there was talk of a possible reintroduction years before the actual population that was still there had died off. And so actually, I came out against the reintroduction for a few years and published an article on that, explaining that I felt from a scientific standpoint, it would be better to try to allow the existing population to repopulate if it could. Because there had been times earlier when it looked like maybe the population was declining and might be in danger, but they were able to repopulate. And so perhaps when this new reintroduction was first discussed, there was still at least one breeding pair there on the island. And I thought, well, let's let them see what they could do. Wolves, average litter size of wolves is about 6. So, if they had a litter of 6, and they survived well, that population maybe could have recovered. But it turned out that after a few years, we learned that, in fact, that pair was not reproducing successfully. They did have, certainly there was one of those years where they had at least one pup, and that pup looked like it was, well, it didn't survive the winter apparently. And so after that, I realized that, well, you know, this pair is soon going to die off anyway. And I did want to see wolves back on the island. Ultimately, I thought, well, yeah, I mean, it might be time. You know, from a practical standpoint, one can't just say, okay, we're going to put wolves out there. You have to have the public's backing. You have to have the government's backing. You have to have the money. And it looked like all of those were coming together. All of those conditions were starting to come together. Meanwhile, this last breeding pair was getting older and older and was not successfully breeding. And so by that time, I thought, well, yeah, I think it's time to do a reintroduction, and I got behind it.
So and I could go on for hours now, but let me ask, I mean, genetically, is that a viable thing? Even if they could have reproduced, is it genetically possible then that their descendants, you know, could breed with each other to
Well, that's the interesting thing. That's what we would have learned if that could happen. because and that's not that's really not a that's a good question, and it was partly answered by the original population, because the original population, like the ancestors, it was just one female and one or two males, and did successfully breed for 60 years. So, you know, now you come to the end of that 60 years, what could this last pair do? Could they perhaps allow that population to sort of reflourish? And that was the interesting question.
That's fantastic. Okay.
That never got answered, of course, but
so let me ask, of the original population, there are no descendants left of that original population? They completely
that's as far as we know, yeah.
And how many wolves were reintroduced?
Well, I don't have all the figures at my fingertips, something like 19 or something on that.
Okay.
But there were complications because one or two of them died pretty quickly. And then one of them came back to the mainland the first chance it got. So, you know, but there was just a news release yesterday that there's apparently been a couple of litters that have been produced now this past summer or this summer. And then certainly one or two the year before. So it does look like the ones that were reintroduced are now breeding and having pups, and that we can't wait till next winter. Unfortunately, for the first time in all these, since the wolves got to the island, the researchers were not able to get over there last winter because of the pandemic.
Oh.
You got to fly over there, or you got to get together with other people and a closed container and fly over there, and that was not allowed. So we did not get a count this past winter, or they did not get a count this past.
Right.
But so everyone's waiting for next winter, which would be the first winter they can get a really good count. But my guess, you probably will write this down. But anyway, my guess is I'm still guessing there'll be 15 to 20 wolves on the island next winter.
Fantastic. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. You know, and my mind is, I definitely want to ask you many, many more questions, but what did it mean to you to be chosen as a Michigan Notable Book winner?
Oh, well, it's wonderful. I mean, it's always wonderful when, you know, when one's work gets noticed like that. And even this interview, it's wonderful to do it. So I really appreciated that award. I really appreciated it. It meant a lot.
Well, David, we really appreciated your book, and thank you so much for your contribution to the literature of the Midwest, the state, the Great Lakes, the world. And thank you for your conversation today. This has been just fantastic. One of the more fascinating ones, to be honest. I mean, and quite frankly, I grew up always reading about Isle Royale.
I see.
And one day I'm going to get
You
there.
need to get out there, Tim. Yes.
One day I
Yes.
will get there. It's just the UP is such a long place to drive across to get to it, and so,
Yes.
but thank you so much. And thank you to all our viewers today. And I've been here with David Meach, author of Wolf Island, our Michigan Notable Book 2021 selection. David, thank you so much for today.
You're quite welcome, Tim. Thank you.